So this presentation is meant as a follow-on to my most recent presentation. So the most recent one was about why intelligence is shifting and how it affects society on a broader sense. This one is more about how, and particularly who is causing intelligence to shift. I think it's an understated topic. People largely don't talk about this, I imagine, because there aren't that many very intelligent people looking at the problem. And people who aren't very intelligent aren't necessarily going to pick up on the issue. So I think it's very important. So first off, going back to kind of how I started the previous video, there's a distribution of intelligence across society. Now, intelligence by itself does not determine worldview and moral structure and, life choices and so forth. But having a higher intelligence does generally correlate with having different views on the world. The higher your intelligence is, the more you're going to think about self-worth, the more introspective you're going to tend to be. That's not always true. There are plenty of very intelligent people who are completely mute internally. But with that higher intelligence, you tend to question the world around you more extensively, which in turn leads into questioning who you are and what your purpose is more intensively. Now, the thing about living in any civilization with an intelligence distribution like this is that the people at the very end of the spectrum on either side make up a very small amount of the population. People who are mentally indigent, people who don't have enough intelligence to function in society, as well as people who are so mentally exigent, they have so much mental function that they essentially stick out in society. Both extremes exist in every civilization, and the reality is people who are slightly more intelligent than the average make up a much larger population than people who are exceptionally intelligent at the very end of the spectrum. I said last time that my IQ is 150. I have only ever known maybe 30, probably less than 30 people that have been on my level in terms of intelligence, and that was all K-12. I was in a academically gifted program. I wasn't highly academically gifted. They broke us up by IQ level, and then they consistently tested us to see if they were keeping us on track. There's just not that many people, and I'm going to show you on another slide here. The issue with very high intelligence is that as you go up the spectrum, so to speak, the incidence drops dramatically. And so there are far more relatively intelligent people who are, 115, maybe 120 IQ. There are far more of them than there will ever be of people 150, 160, 170, 180, And you see on the table to the right, as you go up, the incidence just drops off a cliff. I'm 1 in 1,000 statistically. If you go past 160, it goes to 1 in 10,000. You go past 180, it's 1 in a million or less. You cannot find these people in society. They're so well dispersed. And that's another thing. Geographically, intelligent people aren't fixed to one location. You have intelligent people born across an entire population pretty evenly. Now, because larger amounts of population live in the cities now, over 70% of people live in cities, you have a lot of intelligent people being born in cities. But that doesn't mean that all of the people who are going to be 150, 160, 180, whatever, are going to be born in a city. I was born in a pretty small community, and we moved to a city because I was intelligent and because there was work there. But I was born in a small community. I'm 150. There are plenty of people who are born into communities that just can't contain them. But the point I'm trying to make here is they're being born into the middle of nowhere. The fact that they're very highly intelligent might not even dawn onto anyone until they're much later in life. And at that point, their value structure is going to be set. Whereas with people who are always constantly exposed to the fact that they are slightly intelligent, than the people around them, say someone relatively intelligent, you could have that happen anywhere pretty much. And so the incidence of someone very highly intelligent adopting the same kind of worldview as someone who is only slightly more intelligent than the average person is very slim. It doesn't commonly happen, because someone who is so exceptionally intelligent is usually going to know very early on, not only are they super intelligent compared to everyone around them, but also if they use that intelligence against the people around them, they're going to isolate themselves. They're going to ostracize themselves. People who are very intelligent tend to doubt themselves and tend to try to contain that intelligence around other people because they don't want to alienate the people around them. Whereas people who are slightly more intelligent don't have enough intelligence to work with to alienate themselves in many cases. And so they just use their intelligence to the maximum of their abilities. It leads to a false sense of superiority. And that can be very problematic. We see throughout societies, all recorded history, a recurring theme here where you have people in control. That control slowly broadens so that more and more people have suffrage, as I spoke about in a previous video, and there's a couple of slides I'm going to re-reference. But as suffrage increases, as people gain the right to vote, gain a foothold in society, more and more people who are of relative intelligence, just by way of having more of those people in a society at any given time, they gain power and they begin pursuing the goals that they have as relatively intelligent people. Whereas the exceptionally intelligent people are usually some of the first ones to have power. Now, this makes sense conceptually. If you're thinking about being in an aristocracy, for example, a monarchy, somewhere where you need to control all of the power into one person. Well, that one person knows that they can't run an entire country on their own. They're going to keep themselves surrounded by people who are capable of maintaining order. And part of maintaining order in a monarchy is keeping people in line, both inside of your country and outside of it. To do that, you need very intelligent people on your side. Archimedes, he lived in ancient Greece, in Syracuse. It was a Greek city-state on what is now the Italian peninsula. He was distantly related to the king at that time, King Hero II, and as such, his intelligence was of great use to that king. The king understood that having someone like Archimedes on his side meant that he would have access to information that other city-states and other civilizations in the area didn't have. It would give him the edge in maintaining his authority. And so he gave Archimedes as much as he needed to pursue that innovation. These kinds of relationships happen frequently throughout history. Look at Catherine the Great of Russia. She rapidly modernized the Russian state. But, I mean, that only happened because she understood that it was conducive to her capabilities as the ruler to have people around her that were improving not only quality of life, but also the standard of knowledge within the population. The problem with aristocracies is that for every Catherine the Great, you get an Ivan the Terrible. For every forward-moving monarch, you get someone who is just entirely fixated on building their own wealth and their own status, usually someone who's not very specifically intelligent, a relatively intelligent individual who's just been born into power, as opposed to someone who has seized power and has the intelligence enough to understand how to maintain that power. And so it's a very easily corrupted system. It's the most effective system for someone of high intelligence to make an impact on the world, but it's a very easily corrupted system, and they're not very stable. Looking at a timocracy, that's kind of a best of both worlds, at least from my perspective. And of course, I'm biased. I'm highly intelligent, so I'm going to be looking at this from a certain lens. But a timocracy keeps most of the power within the hands of the highly intelligent, the very influential in a society. Those people are going to be the ones who receive the funding and have the opportunities to to pursue their innovations and so forth. But it still gives some authority to people who are not necessarily the most intelligent, but who simply are very good at what they do. People who are good at trades or good in crafts, or people who are effective merchants and so forth. They also have an opportunity to thrive, and so you end up with a less unstable society where you diversify the amount of people in power. You keep that power primarily in the hands of intelligent, well-connected individuals, but you give enough power to people outside of that demographic to ensure that a monarchy can't set up, and that people who are going to pursue self-interest are not immediately in the seat of absolute power. And we've seen that all throughout society. The colonial America was a democracy, and I would argue it was a democracy all the way up until maybe the 1950s or so. Now, you might say, well, no, they were a democracy by then, so on and so forth, but functionally, it was a democracy. Men were still the leading force. Wealthy, well-connected, educated men were still the leading force, and there was a system of sophistication within academia and so forth that heavily restricted the common man from being able to move up to that level. He was allowed to move to a certain degree. He could build wealth and build some form of status, but he was not permitted the same access that he has in a democracy, which worked very well. And I would say that that was probably the best system that we could have had. It's one of the best systems, if not the best system, classically to exist. Sparta is a famous democracy, and while they are quite eccentric by our modern standards, the Spartans were very effective in their way of governance. Now, democracy is where things begin to kind of unravel. By function of population, the highly intelligent of a society will always be overshadowed by the less than highly intelligent. That's just what happens. If you give everyone a vote, then you're going to very quickly drown out the intelligent population's motives and intentions in politics and throughout society. And that's just because there's more people that are voting at that point. You just don't have enough highly intelligent people to maintain control in a society that becomes democratic. And this leads to a lot of problems. It doesn't immediately happen. It's a very slow moving process, and usually the process of transitioning from a timocracy to a democracy happens very slowly. It's happened very slowly in a contemporary sense. It happened very slowly in ancient Greece. But eventually you get to a point where so many lesser intelligent people are voting that the highly intelligent people just lose their voice. And it happens also in the economy and in the scientific sectors, academia. They don't have the ability to make impacts on society in the way that they did during democracies, or especially during high functioning aristocracies. And so this leads to long-term declines. As you replace highly intelligent, disciplined people with relatively intelligent people who aren't going to see the full picture, you end up weakening society on the long term. And that's how you lead yourself into something like an oligarchy. Oligarchies are mistakenly considered conditions of control for highly intelligent people. People like to believe that very highly intelligent people are the controlling persons in oligarchies. They can be. Certainly, someone who's very highly intelligent can see the writing on the wall and realize, it's more conducive for me to simply take control of the masses right now through oligarchical means than to try to function within their society. That certainly can happen. And I think, with Elon Musk, Bill Gates, so forth, maybe they're highly intelligent people. I don't know how intelligent they are, but they might be relatively intelligent, or even more than relatively intelligent, I should say. But certainly throughout history, oligarchies don't establish themselves around intelligence. Oligarchies establish themselves around wealth and connections. Once you have a democracy where relatively intelligent people, and even just average people, are able to gain wealth, dramatic wealth, then you're able to manipulate those people very easily. whether you're relatively intelligent or exceptionally intelligent, manipulation comes naturally once you understand where someone else is weaker than you are. And when you're intelligent enough to see other people's weaknesses, you can manipulate them into doing what you want. In an oligarchy, that's all it is. It's manipulating people under you and around you to do what you want to make yourself usually more wealthy. A very highly intelligent person is not going to be drawn to wealth in the same way that someone of relative intelligence is going to be drawn. There are higher pursuits for an intelligent person, an exceptionally intelligent person, than wealth accumulation. But if you can't see that far, if you don't have the mental discernment to understand that wealth only takes you so far, and having a stable society is a far better option than pursuing, unrestricted wealth for yourself. If you can't see that because of the lack of intelligence, your limited intelligence, then you're going to pursue the what you can see. The only visible option, which is I need to be the wealthiest person in society because then I control everything. It's a pretty dumb position to have by standards like mine, but I mean that's the standard that a lot of people have. You look at our politics, you look at our economy, that's what most people are doing now. It's what happens in a democracy especially, and we're transitioning into an oligarchy here in the US because relatively intelligent people who don't see the full picture are now the ones who have a lot of wealth, who are very well connected, and who are able to use that wealth as influence in shaping society the way that benefits them the most in the short term. Of course, they're not thinking about long term because they don't have the cognitive resources to think in terms of long term, but they're doing what they think is in their best interest. Now, of course, this has all happened before. This is what happened to ancient Greece. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this slide. It's from a previous presentation, but I mean this is what happens in societies. You start out with a very small amount of people having power. It transitions over time into being a larger civilization because it's successful, because that small group of people is very effective. And it becomes less and less effective over time. As you give more people a vote, more people are going to vote for things that are desires and not things that are needs. Critical infrastructure goes neglected. Advancements in science and medicine go unpursued because it's much more profitable to just stay in the now than it is to try to move into the future. This is the exact same thing that has happened here in the US, and it's largely due to the same factors. You start with people, very tight-knit group of people, relatively intelligent, even more than relatively intelligent, especially starting out. A lot of the people who came to the US from Britain and so forth, if they were well established in Britain, they became well established here. To be well established in Britain under a monarchical rule, almost an absolute monarchy for most of that time, you had to be useful. You couldn't be just wealthy. Wealth got you a certain distance, but you needed to be useful. And the very intelligent innovators, people who were able to strategize and problem solve for the kingdom, for the empire, that was what was desired by the monarchy. And so very intelligent people, by nature of being in a functional monarchy, got sent here. And so you had exceptionally intelligent people running the country for a very long time. When we became a democracy where land-owning male citizens had power, it was still essentially that. In a democracy, that unraveled over time, but it did unravel. It's unavoidable. Democracies unravel that kind of system by way of putting more people into voting power. And now we're going into a system where no one has any power except corporate shareholders, which, I mean, who is that? Can you put your name on who a shareholder is? And I can't. So the reality here is it's unavoidable. It just happens. And unfortunately, we've known about this for all of recorded history, pretty much. Plato understood this very well, and in Plato's Republic, it's a document that he drafted, essentially describing the ideal society. He said that it was the imperative of the highly intelligent to run a society, and he described what was pretty much a totalitarian system. Now, a lot of people criticize him today, especially people of lesser intelligence. They criticize this structure because they feel like it is uh, entirely against the ideals of freedom and democracy. And it might be, that is not the argument that I think he was making, that freedom and democracy should be protected. And certainly it's not an argument that I would make either. You see what freedom and democracy give you. They give you oligarchy. They give you a loss of political effect, a loss of purchasing power. They give you so many problems that could be prevented, that would never have to exist if the right people had power, and the right people don't have power. I think just about everyone in America today would agree that our political system is dysfunctional. Why is that? It's dysfunctional because we have created it to be that way. It didn't start that way, but it's turned into that because of suffrage, because of the way people are able to vote for things that do not reflect their long-term interests. And of course, he understood this as well, and he structured society so as to prevent people from divulging into these less desirable conditions. From degrading, rather, from finding themselves so easily distracted. He wanted people who would not give up their discipline, and only highly intelligent people are capable of that, in power. And, if we're going to fix society, knowing what we know, knowing that this is something that cannot be avoided, you go from a tight-knit group of powerful people to a broader group, and then you go to shareholder value. If that's how it's going to go every single time, then we need to be willing to set some standards. We need to be willing to say, only intelligent people, very highly intelligent people, should be in positions of power. And when they are in positions of power, they should be heavily restricted. They should not be able to own large amounts of money. They should not own large properties. They should not own manufacturing capacities. They should not be restricted from society in the sense that they have luxuries that society does not. In fact, they should be mandated, by way of Plato's design, to live probably communally. I think that a voluntary communal living, kind of a segregated living style for the very intelligent that were leaders of society, would be ideal. You put them together and you force them to work towards the goals of society, towards progress, as opposed to towards financial gain or power or influence. And I think we would have a much better society that way. We have not tried to do what Plato said we could do in a modern sense, and that's a real shame, because now we have the internet, we have technology that would effectively make this possible. It wasn't possible before. And we see how technology is being used right now. It's being used largely to subvert the masses. If we were to instead use that kind of technology to empower the intelligent, that would be a much more effective way of going about constructing and maintaining society. So, there are very clear pathways here. It's not an unknown variable on why society goes this way. It leads down a predictable course, but that doesn't mean that we have to always repeat the same cycle. We have technology now to break that cycle, but it's going to take us being honest about a few undeniable truths. That very intelligent people are probably going to be better in leadership positions in society. Now, it's not just intelligence. They have to be nurtured. They have to be bred to understand their role in society. They have to be groomed for the role, essentially. But if you were to take a very highly intelligent person and make that the president, make that your political representatives, make those people the CEOs of major companies and the leaders of regulatory bodies and so forth, then they would pursue policies that were conducive to society, as opposed to pursuing a policy that is in the maintenance of a bureaucracy that simply slows society down and makes it more difficult for people of high intelligence to have any meaningful impact. It would be the difference of living in a society of brain rot and living in a society of geniuses, Einsteins and Archimedes and Teslas and so forth. There are people who could be doing so much more in society that simply cannot, because they live in a society run by people who don't want to pursue greatness. They don't want to pursue innovation and change. They want things to stay familiar. Even if they hate what's familiar, it's the devil they know. We could change that. And I think we have a moral imperative to do so.